Dance and fashion are sister arts, both dealing in fantasy and physical form. The body is both mannequin and sculpture. And the story of ballet is, in many ways, a story told through costume. From the stiff grandeur of the court dress to the ethereal softness of romantic tutus, fashion has always played a leading role in shaping ballet's evolution, politically, aesthetically, and physically. Costumes reflect values, hierarchies, and reveries. They tell us what the body was meant to represent. They tell us what stories were worth telling. Welcome to episode 1 of our Dance and Fashion series. Over the next few episodes, we'll take a look at the ongoing love affair between ballet and fashion that's been going on for centuries. We'll start today with haute couture and the role of fashion in keeping or disrupting societal order. Haute couture is a French term which literally means high dressmaking or high sewing, and it represents the pinnacle of fashion design. Exclusive, custom-fitted garments made from high-quality, rare fabrics and crafted with meticulous attention to detail by skilled artisans. Although haute couture is deeply associated with French culture, it was officially founded by an Englishman, Charles Frederick Worth, who established the first couture house at 7 Rue de la Paix in Paris in 1858. Worth was a designer who dominated Parisian fashion in the late 19th century. Born in Lincolnshire, England in 1825, Worth began his career as an apprentice and clerk for 2 London textile merchants, where he gained extensive knowledge of fabrics and the dressmaking business. During this period, he also visited the National Gallery and other collections to study historic portraits, where he drew inspiration from the dresses depicted in these paintings for his own future designs. In 1845, Worth relocated to Paris and, after early struggles, secured a position with a prominent firm dealing in textile goods and ready-made garments. Rising to become their leading salesman, he eventually opened a small dressmaking department within the company. Worth's designs then won prizes at the Great Exhibition in London in 1851 and Paris in 1855, which led him to open his own firm with a business partner in 1858. Let's talk a little bit about the term haute couture. In France, this is actually a legally protected term, defined by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. The chamber decides which fashion houses qualify as true haute couture. Similarly, France has organizations that do the same for dance and French language, among other things. But for haute couture, according to their rules, only companies listed annually by a commission at the Ministry for Industry can use the label legally. So these rules were established in 1945, post-occupation and World War II, to ensure that only certain fashion houses can use the label. The criteria include: the house has to have custom designs. The designers must create made-to-order garments for private clients. They must have a workshop or atelier in Paris with at least 20 full-time staff members and 20 full-time technical experts. And they must present a collection of at least 25 original designs twice a year during Paris Couture Week. This is similar to the word ballerina in that when we hear the word, we think of a fashion house that could be from anywhere, right? Paris, London, New York, Milan, but really it's only the houses that are coming out of Paris and that follow these specific sets of rules. And with the word ballerina, in common conversation outside of the dance world, if you use the word ballerina, it literally translates to and means for most people a female dancer. But in the dance world, it's considered a title. Most ballet dancers would not refer to themselves as a ballerina unless they're a principal dancer or of a certain rank, right? It's like there's this air of grandeur and that you have to earn that title. So there's a little bit of a reflection there between ballerina and couture. But let's back up just a little bit, a half a millennia or so, to Europe in the Middle Ages, and Europe in particular, because we're tying this to ballet, and so the locational context matters. We're quite used to today fashion being an expression of the individual, and haute couture, the exaggerated, most luxurious version of that expression. But this was quite a different story in medieval Europe. Fashion was used not as an expression of identity, but rather to identify groups of people between political and economic delineations, separating the Christian from the non-Christian, which is rather a wide swath, I know, but this is how it was seen. Separating one social class from another, the married from the unmarried. Allegiance to a certain lord and their house would be expressed by wearing the colors of the house. So, in other words, it was a way of organizing and monitoring a wider society. And in medieval Europe, nothing was readily available, even for the wealthy. Fabrics had to be sourced, often made from scratch by spinning or weaving, which were considered essential skills. In fact, many people across all social classes spun or wove their own fabric. And specifically, women spun and men wove. So what's the difference? Spinning involves creating yarn from raw fibers by drawing and twisting them together, typically from natural fibers like wool, cotton, silk, or flax. And early spinning tools included a spindle and distaff, although today machines can also spin yarn. And then weaving creates fabric by interlacing two sets of yarn or threads to form a continuous piece of material. Weaving is typically done on a loom and can produce patterns and textures, including products like crepe, muslin, and organdy. This process meant that acquiring a new garment required planning, often in anticipation of a religious or a secular event. And spinning, in fact, was one of the few commercial ventures acceptable for women, offering them one of the few ways to financially support themselves outside of marriage. And this is where the term spinster originated. So a woman who's spinning and living alone and supporting herself. Linen and wool were the most common fabrics as they were locally produced. Raw cotton was imported in small amounts from Syria, and silks, often referred to as tatter cloth, came from Central Asia and the Middle East. But these luxurious materials were reserved for the extremely wealthy, and even they had difficulty obtaining them. By the 13th century, Europe began producing its own intricately woven silks. The challenges of fabric creation and sourcing made tailoring a highly sought-after profession, and skilled tailors could enjoy a comfortable life as demand outweighed supplies. Guilds for textile workers, similar to corporations or unions, regulated training and controlled access to the profession to limit competition. So that's a little bit of the early days of textiles and its place in European society. But let's get into the birth of fashion with its emphasis on the individual. This is the antithesis of the basis of medieval society. In modern times, a person can dress for the job or social stature that they are in or that they aspire to be in, whereas in medieval Europe, the social structure was fundamentally opposed to change or grow within any one lifetime. And it seems now there's quite a bit of debate as to how and why fashion as we experience it began. There is even a fair amount of disagreement as to whether or not it happened in Asia before Europe, because we were in fact getting more intricate fabrics from what is now Eastern Asia and the Middle East from quite an early time. But for the purposes of this podcast, it's Eurocentric because we're tying it to the evolution and birth of ballet. Of course, you had the very wealthy able to make certain choices, but as a philosophy, there is much debate as to how and why the shift from the group to the individual took hold. And the author, Giorgio Riello, writes in his amazing book called Back in Fashion. I highly recommend it if you're interested. He writes, Diel Blanc, among many, writes about fashion as a revolutionary change that came to shake long-established hierarchies and moral precepts. The most conservative cried that the end of the world was approaching. This might not have literally been true, but in many ways, fashion signaled the dismantling of medieval society, a challenge to the idea that hierarchies were stable and that personal expression of limited value. Between the year 1000 and the Black Death Plague in 1347 to 1351, European population exploded by about 300%. And with so many more people tending to agrarian needs, the cities grew in population. In this time, great cities such as Florence, Naples, Milan, Paris, and London became noted cultural and economic centers. This time period in urban growth is often thought of as being the first recorded birth of European fashion. Now, in these much more crowded cities, it was easier to pass oneself off as who you'd like to be, where wealth rather than birth could distinguish a person. And when you think about it, cities are inherently not about life's necessities. They flourish when the necessities of food and water are otherwise tended to, opening the door for fashion, art, and culture. By the later medieval ages, the demand for pearls, silk, gold, and silver threads from Asia had grown, and it was seen by many conservatives as a danger to the society at large. Conservative in the literal sense of the word, as in wanting to conserve what was. So much so that something called sumptuary laws were enacted. These were laws that literally dictated what a person from a certain class was or wasn't allowed to buy or wear, endeavoring to keep in place the practice of what one was wearing to be a clear and distinct marker of a person's identity and their social position. Here's another quote from Giorgio Riello's Back in Fashion. 1363 English sumptuary law dictates that craftsmen and their wives, daughters, and children wear no suit worth more than 40s, and the wives and daughters to wear no silk veils but only thread made within the realm, and no fur but only lamb, coney cat, and fox, and that esquires and gentlemen under the rank of knight, with incomes below 100, and their wives, daughters, and children to wear no suits of clothes worth more than 4.5 marks, nor cloth of gold, silk, silver, or embroidered cloth, rings, buttons, items made of precious gold. So you see, these laws were quite specific and really, really intending to keep people in this social order and to keep this expression of the social order going. There he also writes about how in Philip Stubbs's Anatomy of Abuses, 1583, describes 3 categories of sinful pride, that of heart, mouth, and fashion. Fashion, he believed, was the most egregious, as it offended God more than the other 2, as it is fashion that can be seen and thereby influence the other, whereas the heart and the mouth can be kept silent. So you see, the individual is, as always, an affront to those who would hold on to power. If we're sovereign over ourselves, we're no longer truly ruled by the lords of the land. But now let's exit the medieval ages and enter the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. The 16th century in Europe saw significant changes. Medieval society's boundaries were being broken, and Renaissance ideas were spreading to France, Flanders, England, and Spain. With an eventual expanding middle class, thanks to the plague lowering the population and making workers more in demand, people began to expect a higher standard of living. European exploration, especially from Portugal, Spain, and Italy, brought new riches, materials, and precious metals, which also influenced fashion. And the wealthiest regions set the fashion trends. Until about 1510, Italy led fashion. Then Germany and Flanders took over, and by the mid-century, Spain became the dominant fashion influencer. Early 16th century styles developed from late 15th century Italian fashion. Women, tight underbodices with metal or whalebone strips to create a small waist and slender torso, an early form of the corset, which we still see in many professional tutus today. Skirts were shaped into a cone or inverted V silhouette using petticoats made from canvas and circular wicker hoops, a fashion originating from Spain in the previous century. And now let's talk a little bit about men's fashion. This is really, really relevant to the development of ballet as an art form from the beginning. The reign of Louis XIV of France from 1643 to 1715 established France as a major European power, and Paris set the trends, spreading new styles through mannequin dolls and costume plates. And mid-century men's fashion featured ribbon and lace decorations with a white shirt, a waist-length open jacket, and full breeches, known as petticoat breeches. Between 1665 and 1670, a new masculine style emerged, leading to the modern three-piece suit. This included a knee-length coat, influenced by the Persian kaftan, so you see we have more influence from what we now think of as the Middle East. Until the early 1770s, France dominated fashion and ballet. Dressmaking, tailoring, wig making, haberdashery, millinery thrived in France. Textiles were luxurious, featuring delicate designs and decorated with lace ruffles, ruching, ribbon bows, rather than jewels. And preferred fabrics included silks, satins, taffetas, and velvets. In the late 18th century, fine cottons became popular due to the triangular trade involving manufactured goods, slaves, and raw cotton among Europeans, Africans, and Americans. The Enlightenment brought significant societal changes in the 18th century. Men who had been the fashion leaders of society for centuries began to step back. Their clothing became less ornate and more consistent, while women's fashion became the primary focus for displaying the latest trends. As capitalist and democratic ideas grew, so did the middle class, leading to a more egalitarian approach to fashion. And this shift gradually ended the notion that luxurious and high fashion were only for the aristocracy. Now, in the 18th century, men continued to dress elegantly. Changes in their style were slow and subtle. The French outfit, which included a coat, waistcoat, and knee breeches, became standard attire. And there was a move away from bright satins and velvets towards darker, more serious fabrics. The design of the habit also became simpler, with less decoration and a closer fit to the body. Although wigs remained popular through the 1780s, but they became smaller and less elaborate over time. This change in men being at the forefront of fashion was congruent with them no longer being front and center on ballet's stages, and we'll get into why that happened in another episode. Remember, for the first couple of hundred years of the art form of ballet, men were the kings of the dance. These changes were solidified in the years of the French Revolution, which was 1789 to 1799. The monarchy and the old codes of hierarchy and inherited power went out of style, and wealth, merit, and earned power came into style. Napoleon, who stood as the leader of France in 1799, made some changes to the Paris Opera, which is the first ballet company that ever existed, and it's still alive and well and one of the best companies in the world today. He took steps to make the Paris Opera a more merit-based institution, based on discipline, where a dancer could rise through the ranks based on their abilities rather than their status in society. He established juries and committees to protect artists from favoritism and to ensure a fair playing field. And until this day, the Paris Opera has a completely different system for promoting its dancers than any other company in the world, and it's based on Napoleon's rules. That the militaristic discipline and uniformed style of dress that we still practice in ballet today became the norm. Those black and white dress codes that you see in ballet schools all over the world, you have Napoleon and the French Revolution to thank for that. Before the French Revolution, ballets focused on grand aristocratic themes, such as stories about gods and goddesses, designed to appeal to the noble audience. However, after the Revolution, ballet began to shift its focus. Instead of lofty divine subjects, the stories started to reflect the real lives, beliefs, and superstitions of ordinary people. Included tales of the supernatural, spirits, fairies, and other worldly creatures interacting with everyday life, which marked the start of ballet's romantic era. During this period, women increasingly took center stage starting in the early 1800s. The French Revolution had a significant impact on the role of the male dancer. As the monarchy and its ideals fell out of favor, so did the revered danseur noble, the male dancer who had once embodied the elegance and principles of the aristocracy, which by that time, after the Revolution, had lost its power and in many cases its heads. With women now taking on the lead roles in ballet, such as Marie Taglioni, the male dancer's prominence in French ballet was further diminished. The changing fashions of the time also played a role in this shift. After the Revolution, the monarchy was replaced by this merit-based society, where the new bourgeoisie class focused on work and achievement, favored a simpler, more practical style of dress. This meant less elaborate clothing like poofy pants and stockings, which had been associated with the aristocracy, and instead the bourgeoisie embraced darker colors, suits, and trousers, styles that reflected these new values of hard work and merit over inherited wealth and status. These changes in fashion helped solidify the decline of the male dancer's role. To this point, there was a Parisian aristocratic subculture called dandies, who took their sartorial choices very seriously and rejected the new, darker, calmer styles and embraced the frills and finery of the past. They also, incidentally, were big ballet fans. So, as the costumes of male dancers had typically followed suit with the high fashions of the day, the dancers also rejected the somber, darker clothes and trousers in favor of stockings and shorter pants. This may have been a decision based on practicalities. It's easier to do steps and move in tights and a vest than in stiff trousers or a suit jacket. But either way, the fashions of the day were changing, so the male dancers on stage now started to really look like dandies, or as it says in Jennifer Homan's Apollo's Angels book, look like disaffected aristocrats, which really served to drive the nail in the coffin that the male dancer was now something to be scorned and left in the past. So you see, it's really amazing the way politics, imagery, and fashion drastically altered the entire future of an art form that is in fact not inherently masculine or feminine, right? Ballet's early days were replete with the kings of the dance, the aristocrats, the noblemen in French and Italian courts. And then with the Revolution and these changing men's fashions, it opened the door for the ballerina to become front and center. And that's where we really see ballet start to take on the aesthetics that we recognize today. Which takes us into next week's episode, where we'll look at the evolution of the tutu and what that meant for the dancer, the art form, and the society. Thanks for listening. I'm Cynthia Dragoni, The Dance Lens. The Dance Lens is a podcast, a Substack, a YouTube. We're also on Instagram and TikTok. It's a place where dance meets the arts, fashion, history, politics, and social evolutions. If you like this and you want more great dance content, make sure you join me on Substack, where we have behind the scenes, great conversations, articles, videos, and more podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.